What if I told you everything you learned about one of history's most famous queens is a lie? In 2023, a shocking discovery turned the history books upside down. If you're enjoying this mystery so far, go ahead and smash that like button. In February 2023, three codebreakers proved that Mary, Queen of Scots, ran her own secret counterintelligence operation against the English government for years before they killed her. Her letters had been sitting in the wrong filing cabinet at the National Library of France since the 1500s. Nobody ever read them. When you finally do read them, the woman in those pages is not the lovesick, tragic queen from your school textbooks. She is cold. She is calculating. She is giving the orders. This makes the trap that killed her even worse, because they did not catch a fool. They had to build a machine precise enough to catch someone who had been outmaneuvering them for a decade. But here is where it gets crazy. The popular version of Mary Stuart goes like this: beautiful, reckless, unlucky in love, maybe helped murder her husband, stupid about Bothwell, imprisoned for 19 years by her smarter cousin Elizabeth, and executed because she got caught scheming. There is a simpler version of those claims, and most are wrong. Let's start with her body. Mary was around 5'11". In the 1560s, that made her a spectacle just standing in a room. Her mother, Mary of Guise, was about the same height. When Mary fled into England in 1568, witnesses could easily pick her out of a crowd by height alone. She also survived smallpox twice. The first time was in infancy without scars, and the second time was in France in 1557, when the royal doctor, Jean Fernel, was credited with saving her appearance. She fought off severe measles at Dumbarton in 1548, and probably rubella the following year. Before we uncover the truth about her face, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss out. Genuine contemporary portraits painted from life do not suggest the striking beauty legends insist on. Tudor Times puts it plainly: her impact was animation, voice, and presence. Her face was secondary. Now you won't believe this next myth. Documentaries love claiming Mary had purple or red urine from a hereditary disease called porphyria. That detail actually belongs to her son, James VI, whose doctor described his urine as purple as Alicante wine. The Stuart porphyria thesis was proposed by Ida McAlpine and Richard Hunter in 1968, tracing back from George III. The case for Mary rests on stomach pain, vomiting, mental disturbance after the Rizzio murder, and reports of blistering hands in sunlight. It has been heavily challenged. The competing diagnosis, going back to McNulty, is a gastric ulcer. Her Westminster Abbey tomb has never been opened. No DNA analysis has ever been done on her remains. Any claim of modern DNA confirming porphyria or height is totally fabricated. And wait until you hear the truth about her execution. Her famous auburn hair needs correcting, but wait until you hear about Lord Darnley, because he is the real turning point. He was tall, very vain, and most modern experts believe he had syphilis. Less than a year after the wedding, he teamed up with Protestant lords to murder David Rizzio, Mary's Italian secretary, right in front of her while she was 6 months pregnant. If you are enjoying this so far, smash that like button. On March 9, 1566, they dragged Rizzio out of the dining room next to her bedroom at Holyrood and stabbed him. Mary herself counted 56 wounds, others say 57. Darnley's own uncle, George Douglas, pulled Darnley's dagger from his belt and left it in the body to prove the king ordered the killing. It was not subtle. Now, about that famous bloodstain at Holyrood. It is almost certainly fake. King Charles II replaced those floorboards 100 years later. Until recently, palace staff just repainted the stain every year as a tourist attraction. Dried blood does not stay red. Early visitors chipped pieces off for souvenirs, showing you how gullible people were. But here is where it gets crazy. 7 months after Rizzio's murder, in October 1566, Mary rode 50 to 60 miles round trip to visit Bothwell at Hermitage Castle. By October 17th, she was vomiting. Records say 50 to 60 times a day, in pure agony, blind, unable to speak, and shaking. Around October 24th, a French diplomat named Ducroc reported her body went cold. People believed she died. Her half-brother Moray actually started dividing up her estate. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next twist. Her doctor, Charles Now, spent 3 hours vigorously rubbing her limbs and forced wine into her. She threw up old blood and came back to life. She later said she wished she had died at Jedburgh. Given what followed, you can see why. You won't believe what happens next. Less than a year after Rizzio, Darnley was dead. He had been resting at Kirker Field in Edinburgh, recovering from what was almost certainly syphilis. Around 2 in the morning on February 10th, 1567, 2 barrels of gunpowder blew up under his bedroom and levelled the house. But here is the strange part. The bodies of Darnley and his servant William Taylor were found in the garden past the town wall. They wore night clothes, with no burns, no soot, and no blast injuries. A chair, a rope, and a dagger lay nearby. The bodies showed clear signs of strangulation. They had escaped the house before the explosion and were killed by assassins waiting in the garden. The gunpowder was just a cover story for a murder that already happened. Within weeks, a poster appeared across Edinburgh. It showed Mary drawn as a mermaid, which meant a prostitute back then. Bothwell was drawn as a rabbit, the symbol on his family's coat of arms, with his initials J.H. The public accusation was loud and clear. Mary married Bothwell 3 months later, on May 15th, 1567. By June 15th, she surrendered to the Protestant lords at Carberry Hill. By July 24th, she stepped down at Lochleven, giving the crown to her infant son, James. By May 1568, she was in England. She would never leave. Now this is where things take a dark turn. The men around her met ends that matched the violence of the times. Pierre de Chasteler, a French poet, was found hiding under her bed at Holyrood around February 1563 and was pardoned. Then he was caught again under her bed at Roslin Castle on Valentine's Day, reportedly while the Queen was undressing. Mary ordered her half-brother Moray to execute him. He was beheaded at the Market Cross of St Andrews on February 22nd, 1563. Which one surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. According to the writer Brantôme, he actually read a love poem on his walk to the chopping block. Then he turned toward the palace and called out, "Goodbye, the most beautiful and the most cruel princess in the world." After his head was cut off, the Secretary of State told the Spanish ambassador a dark secret. He said the man confessed to being a spy. He was reportedly sent by French Protestants to ruin Mary's reputation. It was a giant trap designed to destroy her chances of marrying a powerful prince from Spain, all to make the Catholic Queen look bad. But here is where things get even more intense. John Knox was a totally different kind of nightmare. In 1558, he published a famous book attacking female rulers, originally aimed at the Catholic Queen of England. But by the time it spread, both Elizabeth and Mary, Queen of Scots, were on their thrones. Knox spent the rest of his life trying to take back his harsh words about women ruling. Still, He had 5 face-to-face meetings with Mary, drawn from his own writings, and he made her cry more than once. Preaching at church, he compared her to wicked queens from the Bible. Knox did not care about changing Mary's mind. He was just putting on a show for the Scottish lords who wanted to remove her. She was not his audience. She was just the target he aimed his weapon at. If you are loving these historical twists, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part. Now, wait until you hear about Bothwell, because his ending was so much worse. After a major standoff, he fled north to Norway. But he got arrested because he owed money to an old girlfriend named Anna. He was handed over to the King of Denmark. They locked him in one castle, then moved him to another 47 miles from Copenhagen. The stories say he was chained to a stone pillar half his height, and there is actual proof. You can still see a deep, round groove worn into the stone floor where he paced. He completely lost his mind. He died there in the spring of 1578 at 44, after spending a decade chained in that terrible room. In 1858, they dug up his body. It was so dried out they called it Bothwell's mummy. For over a century, his remains were displayed in a glass coffin inside a church crypt. Finally, in 1976, they sealed him in a solid wooden box. Scotland has asked for his body back many times, but Denmark refuses. You won't believe what happens next with the biggest mystery of all. The famous casket letters were supposed to be the ultimate proof that Mary helped murder her husband. But they are basically worthless today because they are just copies of translations of copies. In 1567, an earl brought out a silver box containing 8 letters and some poems allegedly between Mary and Bothwell. The original papers were passed down through a few lords until they reached Mary's son James when he was 18. James almost certainly destroyed them to protect his mother's name and his own claim to the English throne. Because of this, no living expert has ever seen the originals. One historian believes they were partly faked. She says the longest letter reads like a rambling mess, likely real words from Mary spliced with fake sentences. Another expert ran a deep test and concluded that roughly 1,500 words were genuine, but over 1,000 were completely planted. He called the letters a brilliant, evil setup by Mary's enemies to destroy her. Even Mary's toughest critic, Jenny Wormald, actually believed these letters were mostly real. But she pointed out a shocking detail. Their destruction in 1584 proved they held dark secrets. Queen Elizabeth's men reviewed these letters at the York and Westminster meetings between October 1568 and January 1569. Mary was never allowed to see them. The final ruling was left completely open on purpose. Mary looked guilty, but wasn't officially condemned. This justified keeping her locked away without the diplomatic crisis of convicting a fellow queen. If you're enjoying this so far, smash that like button. Now, here's where it gets interesting. 19 long years of captivity followed. Mary was moved through Carlisle, Bolton Castle, Tutbury, which she absolutely hated, Wingfield Manor, Sheffield Castle, Sheffield Manor Lodge, Chatsworth, Buxton, Chartley, Tixall, and finally Fotheringhay. Sheffield was by far her longest stay. She arrived on November 28, 1570, aged 27, and spent roughly 14 years there under George Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury. Elizabeth gave the Earl a budget of £52 a week in 1569, but his real annual costs ran over £12,000. The government only paid him around 2,700, leaving the richest noble in England paying out of pocket to guard a prisoner he never asked for. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Over time, her body broke down. By her late 30s, severe pain in her side, right arm and hips meant she couldn't always write, walk or stand. She visited the Buxton Thermal Springs roughly 9 times between 1573 and 1584 for treatment. Eventually, Elizabeth banned these trips because Mary was holding her own little court and meeting locals. On her very last visit in the summer of 1584, Mary used a diamond to scratch a Latin poem onto a window pane. She knew she was never coming back. You won't believe what happens next. The whole setup with Shrewsbury fell apart in 1584. His wife, Bess of Hardwicke, and her sons spread wild rumours that Mary and the Earl were lovers. Mary fought back with a letter to Elizabeth that is just mind-blowing for being so reckless. She claimed to record Bess's private gossip, that Elizabeth slept with Leicester countless times, along with the French envoy Simier and Anjou. She wrote that Elizabeth wasn't like other women, was physically incapable of intimacy, definitely not a virgin, and listed all the ways Bess mocked Elizabeth's obsession with her own hands and face. Written in French in Mary's hand, the letter was likely intercepted by Burleigh or Walsingham before reaching Elizabeth. A copy survives today in the National Archives. Looking back, it's hard to tell if Mary meant this as a weapon or a suicide note. Sir Amyas Paulet replaced Sir Ralph Sadler as her jailer on April 19, 1585, at Tutbury. Paulet was a strict Puritan who saw guarding her as a religious duty. He removed the royal cloth of state from her dining room. This stripped away her royal status, which hurt her far more than any physical restrictions. He stopped her servants from using the wool walk, took weapons from her Scottish guards, and banned her from giving money or gifts to locals. He did this explicitly to stop her from corrupting anyone she met. Moving her to Chartley Manor on Christmas Eve 1585 tightened the screws even more. Chartley became the ultimate killing ground. But here's the crazy part. Her captivity was never completely passive. This is exactly where a massive 2023 discovery matters. George Lasry, Norbert Biermann, and Satoshi Tomokiyo published their incredible findings in the journal Cryptologia in February 2023. They had completely cracked 57 secret ciphered letters. These letters had been misfiled at the French National Library for centuries, accidentally catalogued under Italian affairs from the 1520s and 1530s. Which one surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. These secret letters were written between 1578 and 1584, with around 50 of the 57 completely unknown to historians. That is roughly 50,000 words of new historical material, making it the biggest addition to Mary Stuart's life story in over a century. Her code was incredibly complex. It used a homophonic substitution system featuring 219 symbols made of geometric shapes, Greek and Latin letters, alchemy signs, and Arabic numbers with tiny marks. She even had special symbols for specific people. A stretched-out letter H stood for George Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury. Almost all 57 letters went to one man, Michel de Castanet de Mauvisière, the French ambassador in London. They discussed deals for her freedom and the planned marriage between Queen Elizabeth and the Duke of Anjou, which Mary saw as a fake show, not a real negotiation. But here is where it gets really interesting. The letters covered the scary moment in August 1582 when Protestant nobles kidnapped her teenage son, James VI. She wrote about Catholic political strategy, her failing health, harsh living conditions, and constant warnings about English spies. She correctly guessed that some of her own staff at the French embassy were secretly working for the English spy master, Walsingham. Researcher Estelle Paranki of Northeastern University studied these texts and said the Mary in these letters is incredibly smart. She was the boss, giving orders and making big decisions, not mistakes. The sad, lovesick prisoner she played in public was just an act. In secret, she ran her own counterintelligence network. She called out her enemies by name. Walsingham was a clever man and a master liar who faked being her friend. She treated Queen Elizabeth's favourite, Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, as a personal enemy. She wrote bitterly about France, feeling betrayed by her Guise relatives who never saved her. Before we dive into the craziest part of this mystery, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Okay, you won't believe what happens next. Out of the 57 decoded letters, 7 from 1583 to 1584 have matching, easy-to-read copies sitting in the UK National Archives. These copies were handed to Walsingham by a mole inside the French embassy. Finding these matches proves Mary wrote them, but it proves something darker too. Walsingham was secretly reading her private mail years before the famous Babington plot in 1586. The security leak everyone thought was her first big one was actually at least her third. However, the other 50 letters never showed up in Walsingham's files. Her network was actually working. It was not perfect, but it worked much better than the standard history books allow. To crack this code, experts used a computational hill-climbing attack from the Decrypt project at Uppsala University, recovering 30 to 40% of the text. They manually pieced together the rest using early modern French skills. They published their discovery on February 7, 2023, the 43, that was treason stitched into silk, hung in plain sight inside a Talbot household. Nobody stopped her because they thought it was just needlework. Her personal symbol was a marigold turning toward the sun, with a Latin phrase meaning not following lesser things. The meaning is hard to miss. The flower represents Mary's gold, visibly turning away from England toward a brighter Catholic sun. But here is where it gets intense. If you're enjoying this deep dive so far, smash that like button. The most dangerous piece of needlework she made was an everyday cushion. At the 1572 treason trial of Thomas Howard, 4th Duke of Norfolk, John Leslie gave shocking testimony. He testified Mary's servant handed Norfolk a special cushion. It featured a Latin phrase meaning, "Virtue flourishes by its wounds." It showed a hand reaching out of a cloud, holding a pruning knife, chopping off a barren vine branch. People understood the barren vine was Queen Elizabeth, who would never produce an heir. The hand with the knife was Norfolk's right to remove her so a new royal family tree could grow. That cushion was brought into the courtroom as hard evidence. The trial ended with Norfolk's execution on June 2, 1572. Simple needlework was used as direct evidence in a deadly treason case. That actually happened. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting. Norfolk and Mary never met face to face. They only talked by sending secret coded letters. In the summer of 1570, he sent her a diamond ring to propose marriage. She sent him an embroidered pillow. Their entire romance was built completely through secret codes and fabric. Her royal cloth had a famous motto stitched into it, "In my end is my beginning." When her son James took Elizabeth's throne in 1603, those words felt like a dark curse that had finally landed. But wait until you hear about the trap set for her. And hey, if you love uncovering these crazy historical secrets, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part. In December 1585, Gilbert Giffard showed up in England from France. He had secretly been hired by Walsingham. Giffard built a solid reputation in Paris as a reliable Catholic messenger. His mission was to build a hidden mail route between Mary, now locked up at Chartley Manor under a strict guard named Paulette, and the outside world. With Paulette's help, a local brewer hid secret letters wrapped in leather inside a waterproof wooden plug. This plug was shoved right into the weekly beer barrel delivered to Mary. Mary believed this was her safe lifeline. You won't believe what happens next. Every single letter she sent or received went straight to Thomas Philippe, Walsingham's top codebreaker. Understand how this worked. Walsingham did not just find a plot and look into it. He built the entire communication channel, controlled the messenger, hired the codebreaker, and waited for Mary to use his trap. The legal rules were already set up before a single letter moved through that beer barrel. The bond of association and the act for the Queen, safety, had already sealed her fate. Mary was not just an innocent woman writing friendly letters. Here is where the forgery comes in. Before passing Mary's reply to Babington, Philippe added a fake message in Mary's secret code. This fake addition asked Babington for the names of the 6 men supposed to pull off the attack. Philippe's even drew a tiny hangman's noose on his file copy. He knew what deadly trap he had built. But here is where the story gets wild. And if you're enjoying this, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a video. The message was designed to trick the plotters into writing their names on a paper that looked like it came from Mary. Mary actually did agree to the plan. Her own secretaries, Claude Now and Gilbert Curl, confirmed the July 17th letter under questioning. No real historian doubts she was part of the scheme. The shocking truth isn't her innocence. It's that the worst piece of evidence, the request for the killer's names, was completely faked by an English codebreaker. That entire secret mail system was built by Walsingham, run by his spies, and decoded by his team before anyone else saw a word. She had survived other plots before, like the Rodolphi plot in 1571 and the Throckmorton plot in 1583. She wasn't caught in 1586 because she got sloppy, but because the laws had changed. The new rules meant those letters alone were enough to kill her, even if the attack never happened. You won't believe how unfair this next part is. The trial at Fotheringhay on October 14th and 15th, 1586, gave her absolutely no chance. She was denied a lawyer. Her personal papers had already been seized at Chartley on August 11th. She couldn't call any witnesses. Worse yet, they never even showed her the original coded letters. The only proof presented was the translated copies made by Philippe's, read out loud by the prosecutors. She argued they had no right to put a foreign queen on trial. But the judges just left, went back to London, and officially convicted her on October 25th. Now, this is where it gets really crazy. Queen Elizabeth signed the death warrant on February 1st, 1587. She handed it to her secretary, William Davison, but at the same time asked Walsingham to see if Paulette would quietly murder Mary, skipping the execution entirely. Paulette flat out refused. He wrote back saying God would never let him ruin his conscience with such an evil act. So, Lord Burleigh secretly gathered the royal council without Elizabeth's knowledge and sent the warrant out. Robert Beale, a council clerk, carried it to Fotheringhay. The final moments are absolutely chilling. Which part of this twisted trial surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. The execution happened on February 8th, 1587, inside the Great Hall of Fotheringhay Castle. The Earl of Kent and the Earl of Shrewsbury had told her the grim news the night before. She wrote her very last letter to King Henri III of France around 2 in the morning. She barely slept and skipped breakfast. Instead, she took communion using blessed bread Pope Pius V had sent her. She was allowed 6 attendants, her ladies Jane Kennedy and Elizabeth Curl, Dr. Bourgogne, steward Andrew Melville, her surgeon, and her pharmacist. About 300 people packed the great hall. At the doorway, Melville fell to his knees, crying heavily. He told her it would be the saddest message he ever carried, knowing his queen and mistress was dead. Mary didn't shed a tear. She told him to rejoice instead of crying, because all of Mary Stuart's troubles were finally done. Then she kissed him goodbye. The wooden scaffold she walked up to was 2 feet high and 12 feet wide, draped in black cloth. It held a low stool, a cushion, and the execution block. When the London public executioner, a man recorded only as Bull, stepped up with his assistant to undress her, she stopped them. She firmly said she never had such grooms to help her get ready, and never took off her clothes before such a crowd. Instead, she called Kennedy and Curl to do it. Her black satin gown with its acorn-shaped jet and pearl buttons was pulled away. Beneath it was pure crimson, a crimson satin bodice and a crimson velvet petticoat. Red was the liturgical colour of Catholic martyrdom, now boldly visible to every person in the hall. Multiple accounts describe an audible reaction echoing from the crowd. Her shoes were Spanish leather, worn rough side out, almost certainly for grip on the scaffold. Around her neck she wore a pomander chain and an Agnus Dei, a wax disc stamped with a lamb. 2 rosaries hung at her waist. She held a gold crucifix and a Latin prayer book. Kennedy bound her eyes with a Corpus Christi cloth, white linen embroidered in gold, that Mary specifically saved for this purpose. Her final words were repeated 3 or 4 times. In manus tuas, Domine, commendo spiritum meum. Into thy hands, Lord, I commend my spirit. Now, this is where it gets incredibly intense, so if you want to hear more historical deep dives, make sure you hit subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss out. An eyewitness named Robert Winkfield was there and wrote down exactly what happened. There were 2 axe strokes, not 3. The first blow hit the back of her head. The second severed everything except a small piece of sinew. Bull actually had to cut through that remaining piece using the axe blade like a saw. The popular story of 3 clean hits, or an assistant finishing with a knife, is just embellishment. Bull lifted the severed head and shouted, "God save the Queen!" But you won't believe what happened next. The wig slipped right off. Winkfield wrote that as her head covering fell away, her real hair was completely grey, cut very short, and she looked like a woman of 70. The crowd was staring at a grey-haired woman of 44, not the auburn queen from the portraits. Wingfield also recorded that her lips kept moving up and down for a full 15 minutes after her head was cut off. Physiologically, this is just a reflex, but to the people standing in that room, it would have looked like something else entirely. The Dean of Peterborough called out, "So perish all the Queen's enemies." The Earl of Kent answered, "Amen." But wait, because the strangest detail was still hiding on that stage. Wingfield noted that when an executioner went to take off her garters, he spotted her little dog. It had crept under her clothes and refused to come out except by force. Even then, it would not leave the dead corpse. It lay right between her head and her shoulders. The animal was soaked in her blood until it was carried away and washed. It wasn't a Skye Terrier, as that breed didn't exist yet. It was probably a small lapdog, like a Maltese. The story that the dog later refused food and died of grief is just Victorian sentiment. Wingfield doesn't say it. Afterward, Bull reached for the gold rosary at her waist, an executioner's perk. Kennedy protested, as Mary had already paid him in coin. That gold rosary went to Anne Dacre, wife of the Earl of Arundel. It passed down through the Dukes of Norfolk and was actually stolen from Arundel Castle in 2021. Everything else was burned. The English government ordered the block, the scaffold cloth, the blood-soaked clothes, the executioner's rags, and the wooden chips fed directly into the great hall fireplace. The dog was washed by force. They fully understood what they had created. Which part of this dark day surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments. Catholic Europe was already calling her a holy martyr, and every blood-stained piece of wood was a potential relic. Burning her things wasn't just clean-up, it was a cover-up to stop people from worshipping her. Her heart and inner organs were secretly buried inside Fotheringhay Castle. Today, that exact spot is lost. Her body was sealed in a heavy lead coffin and left at the castle for nearly 6 months. The lead burst open in June 1587, and a plumber had to patch it. She was finally put to rest at Peterborough Cathedral on August 1st, 1587, in a Protestant service near Catherine of Aragon. Her loyal servants even refused to take communion at the funeral. But here is where the story takes a wild turn. In 1612, her son James, now King James I of England, ordered her body moved to Westminster Abbey. The grand reburial happened on October 11th, 1612, in the south aisle of the Lady Chapel. She was placed under a marble tomb built by Cornelius and William Cure. And get this, her tomb is larger and more fancy than Queen Elizabeth's tomb across the aisle. James built his mother's monument to completely tower over the woman who killed her. It was a loud, deliberate statement carved in stone, and it still stands today. Now this is where it gets interesting. In 1869, Dean Arthur Stanley opened the vault looking for King James's burial spot. He found Mary's lead coffin against the north wall, sealed in pitch and moulded to her body's shape, with Mary Stuart's coffin stacked on top. The vault beneath her tomb holds an incredible royal lineup. Elizabeth of Bohemia, Prince Henry Frederick, Prince Rupert of the Rhine, Anne Hyde, and the infant children of James II and Queen Anne. Dozens of bodies rest beneath the woman who lost every throne she touched. Also, Fotheringhay Castle wasn't destroyed by James in revenge. That is just a popular myth. The castle simply fell apart from neglect and was taken down around 1628. Now, only a dirt mound remains. You won't believe how her legacy actually ends. Mary's secret codes, embroidery, counterintelligence and legal fights couldn't save her. The trap was built too well. Walsingham controlled the routes, Philippe's controlled the codes, and the bond of association controlled the law. She wrote one letter too many into a system designed to catch exactly that letter. Every political project she touched collapsed. Scotland, Darnley, Bothwell, the French alliance, and the English succession. She was crowned queen of one country at 6 days old and died a prisoner of another at 44. Yet, 16 years after the axe fell, her son sat on Elizabeth's throne. Every reigning British monarch since 1603 descends from her. If this twisted royal story left you speechless, hit share and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Ultimately, the motto she stitched on her cloth of state was the only true thing she ever put into thread. In my end is my beginning.